Welcome to another episode of Comedy Wham Presents with me, your host Valerie, and sometime co-host Miss Purrington. ComedyWham.com is your place to go for features about all Austin comedy. You can keep up with us on Twitter and Instagram at Comedy Wham or on our Comedy Wham Facebook page. Please rate and review us on iTunes if you are listening to this podcast. In addition to podcasts, Comedy Wham brings you articles, album reviews, a calendar feature, and live shows featuring the best in Austin comedy in all its shapes and formats. Launched in 2016, the podcast project brings you funny people and their stories. As a fan, I like to delve into a comic's background and motivations and will usually take a detour along the way. Consider the interview a way for you to get to know the folks that make the Austin comedy scene one of the best in the country. Today, I'm talking to the former Black Star Co-op Board of Directors President and current Secretary. He is, all right, we're just going to say it now. He's not a comic, but you can see him at all the shows all over Austin on any given night. And he is such a beloved comedy fan in Austin that the Velve, our beloved The Velveeta Room, has a drink named after him. And even though you won't get to see him on stage, I have invited him today because this is a special treat where we're going to just geek out about comedy with a hardcore fan. And because this is the 4-year anniversary of Comedy Wham Presents and my 150th interview, I wanted to geek out about comedy with somebody. So now Comedy Wham presents our guest, Marcus Wilson.
Oh, hey, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. Hi.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's exciting.
So I deviated a little bit from the usual formula because our very first episode and every anniversary since has had something to do with Sure Thing. Because Sure Thing is precisely why I got into comedy in Austin.
That's great. Yeah.
From
Austin Java days and stuff.
The Austin Java days, exactly. And without them in my life, we wouldn't be sitting here today. So I thought I wanted to mix it up a little bit this year, but then everybody who listens, stay tuned because Brendan called me out on it. He was like, hey, usually we're involved with the anniversary episode, in that sweet, funny way that Brendan has of, kind of like ribbing you, but, a little grain of truth. So this is going to be a 2-part anniversary.
Oh, is it BKO?
Yeah, BKO. Marcus, not only are you a huge fan of comedy, but you actually listen to this podcast, which is, a treat when I run into somebody that actually listens. So you know the drill. The icebreaker question that's coming your way.
I do.
And just because you're not a comic, you're not exempt. So one word to describe your past.
Oh, I thought about this. I thought it was, it's hedonistic. It's probably the word I was thinking.
Hedonistic?
Yeah.
Oh, you're going to have to explain that.
Oh, of course. So, let's see. So I've had from like 18 to 21, 22, I just tried like anybody that comes out and knocks on your door, they'd say, hey, do you want to join our religion? I'd say, yeah, sure. And then so I was super wound up. Uh-huh. And so after that, I said, no, that's not for me. And so then I just said, well, I kind of start the day and say, what do I want to do? And then I just kind of do that, or what feels good? And I just go do that. Uh-huh. And I just try and avoid drugs and gambling, like hard drugs and gambling. And it's like, okay. So I've gotten into, I've done a bunch of dumb things, I ended up moving I tried to move to Houston and didn't have a job or anything.
Oh my gosh.
And so then I just ended up sleeping under a bench for a couple of weeks before I moved home, and I was like, oh, I can't pull this off. Uh-huh. And so I just kind of have just wandered around and done whatever, just lived that kind of
like a little nomadic life.
Yeah, just kind of chasing just chase what, do what feels good kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's not a bad philosophy.
Oh, no. I simmered down a little bit, about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So it was a little too wild.
Are you from Austin?
Oh, no. I'm from a small town on the coast of Texas in Matagorda County called Palacios, Texas.
Okay.
Shout out to Palacios. It's supposed to be pronounced Palacios, but No, it's one of those things where everyone who's from there just calls it Palacios, so that's what it's called now.
Okay.
It's on the Tres Palacios River, and there's a little bay there. So it's a little shrimping town. It's pretty great.
So upper, lower coast?
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
I don't know where Matagorda County is. So, you would think I would have all of them memorized.
Yeah,
I'm not
Beto
Beto.
went through.
Yeah, I'm not Beto.
But it's pretty much right in between Corpus and Houston, where 71 ends. If you follow 71 east, it ends in Matagorda County, just a couple miles outside of town.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So that's our geography lesson.
Yep.
We're going to cover it all today.
Texas is great. Texas is huge. But yeah, that's the home stretch. That's where my parents still live.
Okay.
So.
And growing up, since maybe it wasn't until after you started following these different, fly by the seat of your pants interests, were you into comedy at all growing up, or is that something that developed more recently?
Well, let's see. So when my brother and I were little, I have two brothers, but when my little brother and I were little, we were, how old were we? We had to been, sorry, I'm counting back. We would have been in probably right around second grade. When I was in second grade, we didn't have cable, so Palacios is a little town, and cable television hadn't been brought to the city in the 90s. It got there in like the 90s. So
wow.
So because of that, my grandmother my mom would send us VHS tapes. She'd record it of like HBO or Showtime or whatever, just an hour or two of TV for the kids to watch.
Oh.
And so we had a tape we watched a bunch. It was Bill Cosby's special, Bill Cosby as himself, and He-Man's Master of the Universe, and was it like John Walsh Street Smart Kids. And so because it had the Street Smart Kids on it, my mom would let us watch it, but we would just watch all three things over and over and over again.
Gosh.
So I watched Bill Cosby a lot when I was little. And then in high school, my parents were tricked into renting Eddie Murphy Raw. And so my parents, as soon as they started playing, they're like, "Oh, you guys go to bed." And so then we would hide and we'd listen to it, like hide behind the couch and listen to the. And so that was my first experience with like stand up exposure to that.
Yeah.
And then from there, it was kind of like I would watch it occasionally, but usually it was just something that I'd never considered seeing it live before until 2017, I think, 2016.
That recently?
Yeah, I was in a long-term relationship until 2013.
Okay.
So from 2004, late 2004, like 2005 or so, till 2013, I was in this relationship, and so I was living in the suburbs, just went to work. And I've had the same job forever, but it's for like this. That's why I kind of settled down. I've got a stable job, but I got a job, and then all of a sudden it was, I was in the suburbs, and it was just kind of like go home, watch TV, eat some microwave, eat food, go to sleep, go to work. It was it was such a boring life, but it was like, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. Yeah. And so it's like, oh, that's not actually accurate though. So what happened was after I kind of chilled out on that, I was like, okay, we broke up. I got really sad. So I started going to Black Star. That's where I got involved with them because I was like, oh, I'll just go to
drinking.
This. Yeah, drinking. Drinking is a great coping mechanism. Yes. And it's like, oh, it's a cooperative and all the cooperative principles and stuff like co-ops and workers' rights and all of that stuff really resonates with me. But so I was there and I was drinking. And then after I'd started doing the board stuff and talking to people, I was like, what did I do? Oh, Master Pancake Theater. That's at the Alamo Draft House. They're closely affiliated. I think it's like an independent thing, but they're closely affiliated. I don't think they do the show anywhere else, really.
Right.
But it's like a MST3K type show that they do live, and so I went with one of my friends to one of those shows, and I was like, wow, this is really fun. And they have different guests on, and they're like, hey, you can see me perform, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, I can see comedy live in Austin. Because I didn't know anything.
I had no idea.
I had no idea. And so I went and I sat there and I searched around online, and it was like, I saw Comedy Wham was there, Last Gas was there, and a couple other stuff. And I was like, oh, where can I go? And at the time, I'd also decided I'm going to switch to not driving. I was tired of driving because I'd lived in the suburbs for so long.
Oh, yeah.
And you drive. Yeah. Sorry, I'm very excited, so I'm trying to meter myself. The suburbs was such a long drive that I would just sit there and I don't want to drive anymore. So I started riding bus everywhere. So I was like, I need a comedy venue that's off of the bus line that I can get to and that's not too late. And so I was like, okay. And I searched, and sure enough, there was Playpen and Sandbox with Rob Gagnon. I was like, oh, hey, it's available. And I searched around for it. It was like, oh man, I love Rob. He's great. And so then it was like, oh, okay. So I went, and I was like, well, I didn't know what an open mic was or anything. So it's like, oh, Playpen. So I went and I showed up, and it was pay what you want. So I just walked in, I put a couple of bucks in the bucket, and I just went and watched it. I was like, wow, this is really interesting, because I went and I saw that, and then I saw Sandbox, and it was just like a totally new experience. Yeah. It's kind of like, I'd compare it, if you only watched comedy like on TV, going to see it live, it's like TV is the microwave TV dinner version of comedy. And so if you actually go to see a show and see somebody live, it's almost always 100% better. It's always much more, if it's fresh, it's really good. Yeah. But at the same time, it's kind of the same thing if you go and you see, like, since I go to shows like every day, if you see this, if a joke can get old, and then it's just like, if you got served something that's old, and you're like, what is this? It's like there's eyes on this potato, But if you get the TV dinner version of it, it's always this. It's like a 10-year-old. If you watch an old Dave Chappelle's if you watch anybody who's not canceled old specials, it's like, oh man, this is. It's like this is a trip, because it's like it's like the same. It's delivered exactly the same. The audience reaction is exactly, everything's all the same. And so it's just, so anyway, sorry to go off on a tangent, but that's what started the whole thing was I went and saw Rob, and I talked to Rob, and I was like, asked him about it. And actually I didn't ask him about it. I went probably like a month, just every week I would go there. And then I was like, oh man, this is so cool. And so then I went and I asked Rob where to go to see shows, and what did he mention? I think what happened was, I've got a piece here. So I was going there. Somebody that was on Sandbox mentioned Punch. So then that's Matt Bearden's show at Cap City Comedy Club. Yeah. So I went and saw Punch. When I went and saw Punch, Ariel Isaac Norman was on Punch, and she mentioned a podcast that she had been running for a while. Her and Jared McCorkle, who's in New York now. Yeah. They ran a podcast called Leading the Blind. You can still find it on iTunes. It's quite good. It's really good, but there aren't any new episodes, I don't think. But it's really good. And I went and I just listened to that, and that kind of is what gave me insight, because they interviewed all the who's who, but they don't just interview them. They ask them. It's kind of Leading the Blind's a podcast that's like Comedy Wham's like, let's interview and find out more about the people. Leading the Blind was more like, hey, you do comedy. How do you do it better? Or how does the business part work? And that part is, I'm always curious about how things work and what they do and why they work the way they do. And so it was like, oh, this is perfect. So Matt Bearden has a terrific episode. If you want to know Austin comedy history, you talk to Matt Bearden or listen to some of his old interviews, and or even on Up Comedy Web, they're just great. Yeah, he's really good.
The one here was very good insight into the history. Yeah. Oh yeah,
it's great. It's great. We're lucky he's still around. We're lucky he got kids.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so saw her show, got the podcast, listened to that podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I knew the names of people, talked to Rob, and Rob mentioned, oh yeah, Mike, the door guy at the Velveeta room. You know, he's great. He like talked about him or mentioned him.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh. And so then I was like, I don't know where this is. So I just wandered down. I just walked, and being somebody recently moved back to the city from the suburbs, I was like, I have no idea what's going to happen, but we'll go down here. And so I went and I wandered around, and sure enough, there I found it. And I was like, hey, are you Mike? And he's like, are you a comic? I was like, no, I just heard your name on a podcast. He's like $10. and then he just kind of like kicks you off. And so I was like, oh, perfect. And, oh man. So, was it that I saw? I think Rob was featuring or something or hosting on this show. And so that's why I ended up going. But, oh man. So yeah, that started it. And then, as soon as that happened, that kind of kicked off where, since I talked to Rob and got Facebook friends with him, and then as soon as Facebook kind of was the catalyst where it was like, once I talked to people, then, okay, you start talking to people, you network, and just like everything, and you start networking, and all of a sudden, boom, it's like, oh, you're connected to this whole network of people, and then it's like, okay, where are the shows being posted? And it's like, oh, we'll go to Lastcast, and it's like, you go to Last, oh, here's a calendar, and it's like, oh, now I have a full calendar of things to do, and for a while I was going a little too hard, where I would go like running from show to show and try and see like 2 or 3 shows at a night, and it was,
it's a bit brutal. I mean, that's festival season for me. Is when the festivals are going on, I'm racing to maximize the number of shows. You want to see. It's so great to see everyone and see the new stuff, and it's kind of like chasing technology, where you're like, oh man, what's the new thing? What are they going to think of next? What are they going to say? So Okay, so now I think with that knowledge, we can start. No, we could start. There was something that you said earlier that I was like, oh, I want to geek out about that. And I don't think this was it, but I do, since this is a little bit of a retrospective, when Leading the Blind showed up in my feed, because I love Ariel. I've interviewed her twice. Probably need to have her on a third time, because she's just, keeps doing newer and better things. When I saw that she was doing this podcast, I was freaked out, because at the time, Comedy Wham, the podcast, was still newish. And so I wasn't really sure of what,
Oh, you didn't want a competitor.
I didn't want a competitor. But then I started listening to it, and I started realizing, okay, I'm able to get guests. People aren't trashing Comedy Wham, so maybe there's a place for both of us. And then it started to dawn on me that their podcast was more of, okay, how do you become better? What are the tricks of the trade? Whereas I really just want to have a conversation and get to know people.
Right.
I feel like since Leading the Blind ended, I have a little bit more latitude to go into some of those areas now, but I still think it's just a conversation to get to know people.
Oh yeah, that's what I think too. I think, I feel like Leading the Blind was a great project, that kind of touched on or was educational, and it was kind of, since they interviewed people, the thing that I liked was that it wasn't just the local comedies. When people came through town, they would talk to them, and so you could get different insight.
Right.
One of the things that's hardest for people to talk about is money and getting paid. And
she blew the doors open on that.
Well, she didn't care. It was because it's kind of this open joke. It's like, oh, 2 drink tickets or you get a meal or something. And it's like, and that's like kind of the standard rate. But I think that that's really where, that show and just in general, it's kind of approaches this thing where it's like, it's, if you look at it like a professional setup, or if you try and look at it from the business side, you get a whole different view of it. It's like the LinkedIn to the Facebook.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that the two podcasts would coexist. There's definitely room for other kind of interview shows and stuff like that. Like, George Anthony has a podcast where they interview and talk about stuff.
Right.
And it's like, and I think that's
And that's willful ignorance.
Willful ignorance, yeah. And so they have theirs, and they post on YouTube, and they have video and stuff like that, and that's cool. Mm-hmm. But I think there's thousands and thousands of podcasts that do similar things, and I think that. So anyway, I think this podcast is great. So
thank you. That's why I had you on, because I knew you would pat my back. But no. Speaking of Pat Dean, the worst person in Austin comedy. No,
best bartender in Austin.
Best bartender in Austin. That's right. He legit.
He was nominated.
He didn't win? I thought he won.
No, a legitimate bartender won. Oh, dang it. Sorry, you're not a legitimate.
No, yeah. You must have spent enough time at the Valve that he felt like you deserved your own drink. That was so funny. The first time I went in, I saw that, because I know you and I know how much of a fan you are, I'm like, there was no question, because it's just called The Marcus. There's no question who that was named after.
Oh. That's a fun kind of silly thing. So the drink specials there, a little thing there is, for the first few years I went there was like the J.R. Brow. There were a few drinks, and they were named after comics in a row. And then when Pat took over from Mario DiGiorgio, they changed some of the drink special names. And then they had like the Scarlet Disaster and Trash Mouth, which were references to like Christina Parrish and Amber Bixby, I think, and stuff like. And so I was like, oh, this is funny. And so I was like, oh, this is great. And so it was funny, but then it was like, oh, it'd been, I don't know, a year or a couple, it'd been a while. I was like, oh, we need some more drink specials. And there were a bunch that were passed or tossed around. And man, it's funny how it's hard to keep track of time, especially at a bar. Yeah. but at the Velveeta Room, they have a Miller High Life Pony, which is the little 8-ounce bottle, or the little, I don't know, it's 8 ounce, 4 ounce. It's this little tiny bottle. It's very cute, and you don't normally see it anywhere. And they're typically $1, which makes them attractive to me. So I'd often get a shot of whiskey, and then I would come in and I would just get that, like, I'm Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and I'm there, 4 or 5 hours. So you drink like 1 or 2 an hour, and all of a sudden it's like, oh man, you drank, so I had it. I'm making a dozen of these a week for this one guy. Wow. And so it was like, oh man. So that's kind of where I think that's why it's there. But yeah, that's great. I love that place. Lindsay and Mike are good people. Yeah. Mike's a trip. It's like Michael Park. He's a trip. He is great. They interviewed him on. They have a Patreon. Pat has a bunch of podcasts. Yeah. But he has a podcast.
Oh, I Learned Nothing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I know that they interviewed him, but I can't place which one. Yeah. And by process of elimination, I'm like, oh.
Yeah, you have to. It's like, well, how many goddamn podcasts? Yeah. And it's like, okay, which one's he on? Okay, one where he talks to people. Okay, well, which one? And so, no, Pat's great. I love him. So it was he interviewed Michael Park in the. So in I Learned Nothing, Ben Cholak, who went to Princeton University, is a philosophy degree, teaches Pat about philosophy. Mm-hmm. If you pay the Patreon, if you sign up for Patreon, then every week, in addition to the episode where Ben teaches Pat something, Pat teaches Ben something. And then that's their intro to like having guests and stuff, teach them about random stuff. And one of them, Michael Park, comes on and they talk to him. And he's been in Austin for decades, and he has lots of cool stories.
Yeah. One of my most treasured memories, I have so many of Pat, because he's just such a good guy, and he's played along with so many of the dumb things that we've done. My other podcast, which, resurrects once a year, Radio Tatas, he was a guest on that podcast for multiple times, and just, always played along and was really, really great. And then came on, he's been on Comedy Wham twice, and, maybe a few months after he had taken over at the Valve. Like, I always think of Pat, and I think most people think of Pat as a sweetheart.
I don't think people think of Pat that much.
Really?
I'm just kidding.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right.
I'm just joking.
Yeah, I forget that the default is you talk trash about Pat.
Yeah, no. Pat, yeah.
But I was at a show, and I don't remember which one it was. I want to say that it was Billy Wayne Davis had come in, and somebody was being rowdy. And I just never had seen the side of Pat.
Oh, the Velvet Hammer. Was that the Velvet Hammer day?
Yeah.
Oh, it was so good.
I was like, Pat Dean raised his voice in a way that just stunned me.
Yeah.
And the way he, like, because I figured, okay, Pat, the lovable lug, he's going to call on Mike to take care of this. Oh no, Pat took care of it.
Yeah. Mike's about 6 foot tall, and he's built like a bodybuilder. He can, he's like a good door guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, he would like scare people.
Yeah, but oh man, the way Pat kicked out this person, I was just like, oh my God.
Oh yeah, I've seen it's happened a couple times. One of my favorite ones is there was so during the Speed Mic Thursdays at 8:30 to 9:30, drink like a comic happy hour. but at the Speed Mic on Thursday nights, a lot of the comics stand in the back. There's a foyer in the back, and they're supposed to wait there until their name's up on the list. And so what happens is you got 20 people standing next to each other. They start talking. Yeah. And so then it just got to the point once where the audience was being quiet. Someone was telling like a longer joke, and all you heard was just the comics. And he just went, shh. And it was just like, it was shortly after the Velvet Hammer incident that you're talking about. Oh, after that event, people called him the Velvet Hammer for a little while because he's such a sweet person.
Yeah.
And then he was mean for a second. It was like, oh man. But after that, he was like, shh. And it was like, oh man, we got shushed. And so it's just, it's interesting because it's like people, I don't want to be mean, but it's funny. It's like people, it's neat because people respect Pat. And you don't expect that when you see him. It's like, oh man.
Oh, poor Pat.
I'm just fucking around. But yeah, he's, no, I'm just goofing. But yeah, no, Pat's a good guy. But
forward this episode to him so he knows, the guy who I have a drink named after is trash.
No, Pat's great. But yeah, it was just him. He commands a room, and it's like, I mean, it's great. I just wanted to be able to say flick into a microphone.
This is go for it. Go for it. All right. Well, speaking of some of our favorite venues, obviously the Valve is one of our favorites. The Fallout Theater, which you must have gone at the time.
I went there a lot.
Movement.
Yeah.
And to me, the resurrection that theater went through. Yeah. Relatively easy parking if you're smart about it. So it's a really, really great venue from, logistics perspective.
Oh, yeah. It's wonderful.
They could have really, they could have easily folded and been done. But the fact that I think it was 5 or 6 people who really, really loved that venue, took it under their wing, invested financially.
Oh, yeah. I don't know the money side of it, but I do know that theater, that's really kind of it's kind of proof. That's like the proof that, people, not only do people like comedy, people are willing to like support it, and the arts are important to people. And it's like this thing where it's like, hey, this is our space, and we don't want to tolerate, we're not going to tolerate abuse and any kind of, anyway, I don't want to get into, I try and avoid the drama kind of stuff, but yeah, it's like, we don't agree with what the new movement does and what they stand for. So we're going to get rid of them because the theater isn't this business, the theaters, the people in it,
Right.
and it kind of taking over. I think. Anyway,
Yeah.
all the people that are involved there are great.
Yeah.
It's like I only know I don't know everyone's name, so I don't want to be like I don't want to just call out one particular person and be like, oh yeah, this is the reason this is so good. But
well, I remember I had finally gotten Ariel Leggett's attention and interviewed her, and that was her breaking news during that interview. Is that she, along with a handful of others, I can off memory. Robert Segovia is one of them. She and Carlos Larada, who's somebody I need to talk to this year.
See, I can picture. Yeah, that's why I didn't want to bring up names because
I don't mind sounding like an idiot.
Well, there's a couple people that who I can picture, but I'm just like I don't know their full name, and so it's like that's not but.
So that was really exciting because I was already going to a lot of shows at that theater, and I've gone to even more since it's been the Fallout, because it's just very open about trying new things, and it has the the love of my life, Sure Thing, found its new home there
after Austin Java went away.
Right? Yeah, because they were pretty much on what seemed like a permanent hiatus.
Yeah, what I thought was really great. Well, that was one of the things whenever I first talking about Sure Thing, because Sure Thing Records is great. They provide and they record and put out lots of comedy albums, a lot of local comedy albums. You definitely should support them.
Yeah.
One of the things that I liked was because they would record pretty much, I think, all the Austin Java sets. They would have somebody recording the show, and so then you could access it. Or sometimes I know that I have one CD that was like just Austin Java recordings, and I was like,
the compilation,
and it's like, oh man, that's so cool. And I was like, man, it would be so neat if that was like a typical thing. But I'm just glad that they help record albums and they help get people's stuff out there. Because
I imagine that was their debut release with Sure Thing Records. That was what got them, started with recording full-length albums. And that compilation, I imagine, is so much work. And now they're releasing, I don't know, half a dozen or more albums a year. And it's not even just local comics. It's I remember Brooke Van Poppelen was... she's a New York City comic, and so it's a legit label, and it's
I wouldn't say that they're illegit or they're. I was like, oh man, I just really, I remember going. I went to the last one at the Austin Java that was there, and I was so sad because I just started like going to all these different shows, and I was like, "Oh, Austin Java!" And I tried a couple times, but the parking there was garbage.
Yeah.
And so I would try to get there, and I would go, and I couldn't get in. And so finally, I got there early enough, parked, went and saw the show, and I was like, "Oh, this is great." And then, I went there, and the next week, and I was like, "Man, there's parking so good." And it's like, "Oh, this business doesn't exist.
Oh, no.
This business is closed." And I'm like, "Oh, well, crap." And so. But yeah, they're great. I like Brendan's stuff. Brendan and Duncan Carson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and every time I've gone since it's been at the Fallout, that's one of the shows where they're bringing in more chairs. That's an 80-person show.
That is they're probably. I think that Fallout Theater is in the perfect location for the audience that they have. You're not. If it was 50% bigger, I think that would be great.
Yeah.
But I mean, with that space, it's perfect. It's in, you've got the basement style and everything. Like the only way you could make it bigger is if you like kicked the masons out and went up a floor. Yeah. And it's like, then what do you do? Then you've got like a Comedy Cellar. What's the room around the corner from the Comedy Cellar?
I've never been.
In New York, there's on one side of the street. I went to New York for the first time last year, and I was there for this tech conference thing, but on one side of the street is the Comedy Cellar door, and then around the corner is the other venue. And so like one's in the basement and one's like on the ground floor.
Okay.
And anyway, it's cool, but I feel like that wouldn't be the vibe. You wouldn't want, I feel like that would be really weird if you went and you're like, oh, well, I want to go to Fallout. And it's like, well, do you want to go to Fallout or do you want to go to Fallout Lounge? And it's like, oh, the lounge is the second story that has like, anyway, I love Fallout, and it's just whenever it gets full, it gets full.
Yeah.
And so it sometimes gets a little, anyway, I get overwhelmed in big, in intense, super packed spots like that.
Well, I get the sense that you don't want to talk trash, or, get into drama, but I thought, as comedy geeks of the Austin scene, I thought we'd dip our toes into a few things.
Sure.
As a segue, yes, there are a couple of things going on. Some I don't think I'm going to touch, and others, it has just been such a hilarious fodder for the comics. This daily open. Oh, I don't know if I should mention it.
I know. There was the open mic drama. Yeah.
And what was really funny is, so Comedy Wham is, I think now we kind of think of ourselves as we're a website, and on the website you can now access different, sorry for saying it this way, different content. We obviously release a podcast, and we release an article that goes along with that podcast episode, but we wanted to try something new, and he never gets named, but Richard Goodwin is the web genius behind comedywham.com, and he had no idea when he and I started becoming friends all the things that I would drag him into. But every year we've kind of added something, and last year it had been my dream to do a live show version, and bless their hearts, Fallout had us, and it was a
Chris
great
Cubis, right?
Yep, Chris Cubis.
Yeah, I remember that.
Karina Magyar, and Aaron Brooks before he left us. And this year we were thinking, well, it'd be kind of cool if we could do a calendar feature. But being very mindful of Last Gas and very respectful of Karina's efforts over the years, I didn't want to pursue that unless I got her blessing. And I wrote to her saying, we kind of want to expand. We're thinking about this, but we would want to do something different from Last Gas so that it wouldn't feel like stepping on your toes. And she's like, I mean, to paraphrase, her response was, "Oh, I'm done. You want it?" And I'm like, wow. So in December, we were doing a lot of behind the scenes work. And in December, we rolled out this events feature, and I have been so overwhelmed. So Richard is the brains behind making that happen. He has made it easy for me to be able to help with posting events, but without him, this wouldn't exist. And I have been so overwhelmed by people who have stopped me, comics who have stopped me and said, "Oh, you're the one with the Comedy Wham events calendar?" And it's like, people are noticing, and whenever I nudge people to do the submission of the events, it's great. People find it easy, so it's awesome. So this was a very long-winded way to say, so when that paid mic thing came up, I was doing these little jabs about, but you can find a whole listing of free open mics.
Right.
And, of course it backfires in a way because the guy behind it, he submits his paid mic for the calendar.
It's like, no.
So it's like this ethical dilemma. And there's a few comics in town that I'll usually tap their shoulder when I need kind of a moral compass thing. And, Richard and I talked about it a lot, and we decided, we understand the vitriol that's happening because the scene isn't there. We're not in New York. We're not in LA. And
Austin has a great scene, though.
It does have a great scene, but it's not so hard to get stage time that this is what you need to do. There's not, it's the guy should have done his research on the market.
Oh yeah. I was just like, I I don't know. I don't want to say defensive, but I always get like I get kind of like I get my shield ready, whenever it's like the Austin scene is great. And it's just so vibrant and there's so much going on that I'm just like, anytime it's like the scene's not there, it's like, man, there's a lot here. So anyway, sorry, but he clearly didn't do his research into the marketplace.
So the decision that Richard and I made was we would post it, but because we knew what was going on with the scene and what the comics were saying, who knew the scene, we told the guy, we're only going to, because we can make an event recurring. And we said, we're only going to make it recurring for a month because we want the producers of brand new mics to come back to us and say, yep, this one looks like it's got legs. Let's extend the recurrence. And within a day or so, he wrote back saying, because we said, we'll post it, but it's only going to be up a month. He wrote back saying, you know what? We're kind of tinkering with the formula. Can you pull it down?
Yeah.
So the market spoke.
Yeah. I think that there's always the problem. I think that it's easy to criticize people and to feel to like throw stones or be kind of like it's not always easy to be mean, but it's usually easier to be mean. And I've been practicing being mean. Christina Parrish has been training me on how to be mean, slowly but surely. So fuck you. But no, I kid. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry.
It's funny that you whispered it in a way that implies you're not mean at all.
But I think that one of the things that's great is it's like you want to be open to people trying new shows and putting new things out there. It's like, hey, I want to have a show that's, I don't know, a butter themed, biscuit show or something. And it's like, and it's like, okay, sure. Nobody, it's like you want to be, and so you want to be supportive of that. But at the same time, when someone comes up, if they have an idea that just rubs you the wrong way, it's like, you've got to kind of like try and balance out. It's like, okay, well, that, because I totally understand some people's point of view where it's like, you know what, if somebody wants to put on a show that no one's going to go to, just let them put on the show that no one's going to go to.
Yeah.
But the thing is that I think that was the reason that people were upset about this is because there's lots of new people that come into town and they're like, well, where can I go? What can I find? And if they would have found this one, they would have been like, oh, is this what? And usually it's like whatever your first experience is, that's kind of what you learn. So I don't know. I could see both sides of it. Yeah. I definitely think that in like New York's or LA's where you pay, like when I when I was in New York, I went to a couple of open mics that were like in like Manhattan, kind of down that way.
Yeah. And
it was like, man, those places, it was like, hey, do you want to go up? I was like, no. Okay. Well, you can go in for free. It's like, well, what if I want to go up? Well, it's like, well, it's $5 for 5 minutes or something like that. And it was like, oh man. Yeah. And then I went and it was like the audience was 12 comics in like basically like a closet. They had a fan in the back and a guy with like a karaoke mic and everybody went up and they just told their jokes and it was like, it was a decent open mic, but it was like, oh, this is just the way that this is just the standard operating procedure there. And so I don't want to talk trash about anybody, but I do think that was probably it was a poorly researched concept. So
yeah. I mean, had he spent more time talking to people to find out, okay, what are the needs? Because I thought that the podcast studio was a great idea because I think a lot of people struggle with getting access to the equipment and a dedicated space.
Well, I think that's where the Austin Film Society can kind of come in. I don't think it's what is it? Who is it? Austin Film Society. So with AFS, I'd have to look up the site real quick, but AFS, if you go there, they have in one of their membership chairs, there's like a studio, and you can like take a training class and then rent out for lower cost. Like you can rent out, like you take a training course to know how to operate the camera, and then you can rent the camera. Or there's a podcast studio. You take the training course, you go through it, and then you can rent a space, and it's like it's a sound studio. And so, anyway,
that's cool. Okay.
It's something that I think that it's a really cool idea, but where the calendar and kind of ties back into Comedy Wham is that the getting the information to people that need it and marketing and that kind of stuff is so hard, because it takes someone that's really good at marketing probably is tired of doing marketing whenever it's like not their main job.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, well, how do you get marketing, and how do you get someone that's good at marketing? It's also good at that also wants to, and so it's just getting all the pieces exist, but getting them all together is a big ask.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where I think the Comedy Wham calendar is great, because it's, if you have a central place people can go that's not tied to like Facebook or Instagram or like Do 512 is super popular, but it's like this giant do LLC kind of thing. They exist all over the country, and since they're so huge, it's kind of like anyway. It's like I would much rather trust a local place that has a calendar that's maintained than
right. And that was one of the things I remember in one of our initial posts about taking over the calendar feature is, yes, you can get this information from Facebook and Do 512, but we actually care about the comedy scene. You know, this has been a labor of love for years and years, and so it's not, you know, because I produce a show now, and trying to get a show posted on Do 512 is jumping quite a lot of hoops, and sometimes from one person to the other, you don't even know which hoop you have to jump, and so it's very frustrating. And we think our event submission process is pretty straightforward, and you know, so far nobody, I mean, not to my face, and maybe they wouldn't to my face. So far, I haven't heard complaints about the way we. Well,
it's hard. It's for me anyway. It's like, since I'm just kind of I feel I'm a consumer. You know, and so since I'm consuming stuff, it's like I want to try and give feedback and be as supportive as I can. It's like I think everybody that does this is great, and it's like, oh man, you know, it's just this. There's personal barriers that I have that are like, oh, you know, this is really cool, and it's just, for me, I don't want to ever like. You know, I don't want to ever insult anybody or reduce or remove any incentive somebody has, or if they want to do something, you know, it's like go for it. Like Sandbox really kind of instilled that in me, where it's like, you know what, it's any comedy show or any performance that you're seeing live that's a live performance. It's like it's open, you know. They're putting something out there, and if you're open to it, you can really appreciate and enjoy it. And you'll enjoy it a lot more if you're just open to the experience. Yeah. You know?
You have people in the scene who want you to do comedy.
Oh, sometimes. Sometimes it's like, it's one of those things, maybe a year or two ago, maybe not even that long, but I used to take when I was first getting into it, I used to take notes like crazy. Like I carried a little notebook around, and I would just keep track. I'd be like, who did I see? Where did I see him? What was their good joke? You know, what was their? And it got to the point where it was like I could just like write down I would just write down set lists from different people and be like, oh yeah, you know, and then when I'd run into somebody,
that's the question I want to ask you about that I couldn't remember earlier.
Oh, okay, yeah, go for it.
Since you see sets over and over and over again, are you, because I have been the type where you notice little nuanced changes for a joke you might have been hearing for a year or two?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's why I, when I was going to Playpen, so I was going there to see Sandbox, and I was like, oh, Playpen is the open mic before the Tuesday show, the Tuesday late show. And I was like, oh, And I would go there, and it was like, oh, this is so great. Because you'd see people, and they'd perform, and they'd do a set, and then you'd see, like come back, and they'd do it, and there's slight changes. And then,
And for the record, for Playpen, technically, you're supposed to bring a brand new joke.
Yeah.
Technically.
I'm not, not since Elizabeth Spears and Nikita were hosting that show have I, it's like, that's the concept of the open mic. But in general, if you go to open mics, or if you just follow somebody around enough, you'll notice nuances in the joke. Like, some people, what I think is fun is some people will try different numbers of things. So like, it's like, I don't want to ruin anybody's joke. So I'll just say somebody might come up and say, they'll be telling the joke and they'll be saying that there are an even number of things. And then they'll change it to where there's an odd number of things and people will laugh more. And it's like, why is it more funny? And again, where it comes from is I'm trying to understand how does this work? Why is this funnier than that? And I think a lot of people are asking the same thing is, well, why did this make people laugh more than that make people laugh? I'm trying to, it's like you don't want to mess anybody's, I don't want to step on anybody's jokes. So I'm like, but well, here's one. Danny Goodwin's a great local guy, and he has an intro that like everybody knows and loves.
Everybody knows it.
And so what I love is part of the intro is he grabs the microphone stand and he sets it back in a dramatic way. So whenever there's a show where there's no microphone stand or the stand's missing, or it's just a piece of garbage and so it's going to fall apart. And so he's like, he goes to set it down and it's like, he has to do it differently. It's like, I love it. Or there was you would have loved this. There was a pop-up show at the So at the Velveeta Room on Friday nights, there's a 9:00 show and then there's an 11:00 show. On the Friday night 11:00 show, that's a pop-up show. So it's rotating and it changes and it's like whoever has an idea, they bring it to Pat and they get to do it. So this show was a show where the comic goes up on stage and performs, and on the screen behind them is a thing they do, a trait they do, or a tick they have, and then if the comedian guesses it, they win. Whatever the winning
show,
is.
Right?
Yeah, it was a Megan Tuesday show. Yeah. I don't know. Is it After Party?
I thought it was.
It might. I don't know if it's After Party, but Megan Tuesday, I think, was doing it. Yeah. So she's now the host of Playpen at Fallout.
Right.
Yeah. So she's great. So this show. So anyway, what was great was because it was so fun because they would be like, oh, when they cross their arms, or the way they grip the microphone or something like that. And it's neat because after that show, it was like, oh, and these are like. Carlton Wilcoxon's great, but there was, it was like, the one for him was, I think, like when he touches the back of his head or something like that. And it was like, he knew it right away. Like as soon, the first time he was like, oh, he knew what it was. But then you see the people that are on the show afterwards, it was like, oh, they're now aware of this thing. And it's like, and so it was fun. Then it adds a little spice to it because now you've got someone's performing, they're trying to do it the best they can, and then it's like, oh, people notice that I did this thing, and so then they don't do it as much. So like, probably like two of the people that I'm thinking of were on that show, they went on and I watched them. I see them, a couple times, once a week or something, and they stopped doing that behavior or they reduced that behavior. And so it was neat because it's like, oh, that's not actually part of that was just a habit or something. And so that's fun. The nuance of things, like people changing like the cities or the way they say things. People who are from different states, they have different ways of saying particular words. And then as they say the word a bunch in Texas, it's like they get more Texas-y. And so that's kind of, that's really fun. But yeah, it's definitely where you watch and you're like, okay, how did you change it? It's like, oh, okay. It's like, going from more to least specific, it's like my second grade teacher, well, just my elementary school teacher, or, and stuff like that. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Sometimes it's like, anyway, it's just very fun. But yeah, I do. I follow that. I used to follow that much more closely. Because like I said, I would keep notes and be like, oh, well, what happened here and what happened here, and try and keep up with it. But what I hate that I've got so many references to this, but in the trip when I went to New York, the reason that I remember the Comedy Cellar thing is because I bought a ticket to go to a show, and I bought the ticket and I went to the cellar, but I was supposed to go to the other one. It's around the corner. I'm a bad, not Austin comedy person. I'm like, I don't know anybody else. If you're not from Austin, go to hell. So, so I went around. So anyway, I waited and I was wrong. So I had to go around the corner. But when I got in there, I plumbed my note. I was like, I started to write down like who I was going to see and what day it was. And I was writing it down. And they came and told me that I couldn't do that.
Oh.
And so they told me that I couldn't take notes during a show. And I was like, oh. And so I was like, oh, okay. And sure enough, it was like at other shows, it was kind of this thing where it was like if you were trying to take notes, it was like, I guess maybe because it's like more valuable or something. I'm not sure, because it's definitely one of those things where people, there are people that steal jokes, but it's like in Austin, it's like if you stole somebody's joke, you'd kind of. You usually can tell, you can tell.
Yeah.
It's like, but then there's Piranha where you can sell your joke. So it's like, there's outlets.
Yeah.
People sell jokes all the time. And so anyway, that was because when I stopped taking notes, I started noticing the differences, but I don't have the database of specific changes, which I would love to have. But at the same time, I understand that it's kind of this thing where it's like, it's not my property to like maintain that kind of data.
It might be an industry thing too, that there is industry in New York, and there are people that, especially at the cellar, you have people that drop in and maybe they're preparing material for, for a special, and so they're mindful of
and they don't want to. Yeah, it's like this is unreleased material. Yeah, kind of the same thing.
Yeah. We're gonna start working on winding. No, why?
I feel like I went too long.
No, I want to toot our little horn a little bit. You are a listener. Have you listened from the very beginning?
No, not from the very beginning. Because I listened. I've listened for a while, but the thing that gets me is it's like I'll listen. How do I put this without being? I'm always trying to not. I don't want to ever be.
You're so nice.
It's important to just kind of like put on love everybody. But I will see who's on and then decide like I'm like how much more do I want to know about this person? Kind of like Pat Dean had an old podcast. It's defunct. Good luck finding any old episodes called Storyfellers.
Yeah,
and that was fantastic because that was like. You would find, it was like, oh, if you wanted to know more, if you would just consume them, and you're like, oh, it's so good. And people that weren't comics, just any random person could tell a story, and it's like, wow, he's really good at getting people to talk and get that out. So anyway, I'm sorry, that's not that's not necessarily the nicest way to put it. I see, okay, who's on? Like George Anthony's on. It's like, oh, I'm going to listen to that a couple times. It's just. And so, so I've listened for a while, and I go back and I look and see, oh, did I miss somebody? And it's like, oh, I want to hear what they had to say. So I've listened to a lot of episodes.
So do you have a favorite? Or some that stand out in your mind that were surprising, or you learned something that you wouldn't have thought, or, something unique?
That's a good question, because that makes it more... I think that Matt Bearden interviews are always like are the ones that I like to listen to because he has a way. I guess since it's his job, he has a way on he has a great job on the microphone and explaining things and sharing history and giving context and providing good work. Anyway, I like him a lot.
Yeah.
And then I really liked I liked the live episode with Karina because I was in the audience on that one, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I really liked that because I thought it was nice. It was the people who are most private are the most interesting to hear their story, because it's like, okay, they've got a specific, like, all right, this is I've cleaned up my living room. You can come in and sit here, but don't go digging through any, don't open the closet door or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, sorry, I don't think I have a specific nuance or anything. I always like it when the cat makes an appearance.
Yes.
That's always.
I am surprised that she actually scurried off, because you are the first interview since her return.
Yeah.
And it's been quite an emotional thing. And I just because this is gonna there's an interview that's gonna come out after your episode with Colton Dowling, which was like, he really had hoped he could be a hero, because he came out last weekend and he thought he had spotted her in the parking lot, and he really wanted to be the hero. But that episode is one where in the introduction I say, she's missing, come home. And the people that listen regularly could probably hear like my tone.
Yeah, it's very stressful.
When I told my son, because I picked him up from swim practice, he knew instantly that something had changed, because my mood was just like 180 degrees different.
Oh, that's so good.
And I could just feel like the pep in my step, and just, I feel so much lighter. And she's been super, super needy, of course, because she's gone 13 days. Yeah,
you were really, that's really lucky.
Yeah.
Condolences to Michael Parks. His cat passed away yesterday.
Oh, man.
That's so sad. That's why I was so sad. I was excited to tell him about your cat being found, but then I was like, oh man, I'm sorry to hear about your cat. So I was like, oh man, that's a bummer.
Yeah, but, I mean, I'm going to need the entire city of Austin to rally around me when she decides, she's done with life. Because I've just been overwhelmed at how responsive and supportive and happy people were when I posted. And obviously
Austin's a big pet town. Yeah. That's for sure. It's like, it seems like there's seasons for jokes, and coming up in the spring will be the season for pet jokes again. And it'll be it's like, oh man, everyone's got something.
Well, I did a joke based on her disappearance, but now I can put a nice little ribbon.
Yeah, you can be like, you can just pretend like that happened. Like,
right.
There's so many great jokes where it's like, that was probably one of my favorite comedy revelations that happened, because since I came to it just so recently, was I was watching. I had been talking to somebody before a show, and they were so happy and everything. They were normal, and they got up and they told this like sad story, and it was just like they had this whole bit, about like how depressed they were, and how they're it's like they're depressed, their boyfriend doesn't love them, blah blah, and then it's like, and then you talk about, and it's like, oh yeah, this is like a performative art, and it's so it's just. So then it's like, okay. And with that, it's like, oh, all right. Yeah, you can take things that are traumatic, like, your cat going missing and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, you can have a joke about it. And it sits in this nice little compartment of time and space where it's like, okay, I can feel these feelings and then come back out of it. And it's like, oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, that's just something I think is really magical about live performance.
And I think something about that is why I was interested in starting the podcast, is because I wanted to get to know the people's lives off stage, because whatever they were saying on stage was hilarious, funny, and you get a mix. Some people are just, they're one-liner only, and others are, I'm going to tell you something straight from my life.
And they try and change it up or make it.
Yeah. And so I wanted to find out, what is the backstory? So,
there's amazing storytellers.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. If you haven't seen or heard, Simply Courtney, he has some great stories. He's a great storyteller, and he's good comedy.
Yeah. I have not seen him live in a long time.
I was like, oh man, when I think of, he has a story about like being a father, I think, and I was just like, man, this is so good. And I was just, anyway, it's always neat. There's so many talented people in Austin, and it's like, it's like, and then Austin, I'm sorry, I know you were trying to wrap up, but it's like, Austin's just, it's bursting with comedy so big. It's like comedy is forcing its way into like Round Rock and Leander and stuff like that. Yeah, Lakeway. Yeah. You've got a show in Lakeway.
Yes.
And it's like, or like, Shannon, was it Mulgrave has, there's like in Manor, there's a show out that way.
Yeah.
And there's like stuff here. And it's like you see people and it's like, oh man, and you get to see like, it's like, oh wow, Lando Shepherd's headlining here or doing this. And it's like, oh man, I want to go out to this. It's like, I guess I'm going to have to drive out to the suburbs to see a comedy show. So anyway, I just was like, oh man. Yeah.
So since this episode is coming out still early in 2020, who are some people that you really want to hear from? Like, Simply is on my radar. He's going to be great. Coming up hopefully before the summertime, but we get overwhelmed when South by comes through, and then of course Moon Tower, so that changes up the podcast schedule. But tell me, who are some people that you think Comedy Wham needs to talk to, and what are some of your favorite shows that newer shows that you're super excited about?
All right, so I think that there's so many people. I don't want to.
I know. I was thinking he might not want to do that.
I don't want to. I'm not gonna. I love everybody. I'm not trying to crap on anybody, but I think that like people to watch for sure. Like, I'd be really interested. Like, well, hold on. Have you had John on? John Rabin?
I have.
He's amazing. I was just trying to think about. I was like, man, I haven't seen him on this. How long ago was he on?
It might be a year and a half by now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been
a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go back and listen to it because I was like, man, who would I want to hear their story?
Yeah.
But like, I would love to hear like that you didn't. So like, Lando Shepherd is great. Candice Medina's been doing really good lately. Yeah. Oh, he's not in town. There's, oh shucks, I got to make sure that I don't want to be like, oh yeah, you should do this guy you did last week. That's what I'm like, oh man. But let's see. I think you did Chris Hills already.
Yeah.
Other people. Kat Struble is a good up and coming person. Her and Ashley Sharma have been doing good stuff lately.
Seeing their names pop up. Yeah.
They're pretty funny. Who else is somebody that's I've not seen around lately? I feel bad because I'm like, oh no, this is going to be.
You.
It's like I don't want. I'm like, oh man, hold on. Let me go.
We can switch to shows.
Yeah.
How about
shows? If we talk about shows, shows are great because they pop up and go, and stuff like that. So there's a show called High Priestess that Angelina Martin does. That's really rad. There's tarot readings and stuff like that. My God. So
I have to tell you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So she submitted for her. I think her show was maybe last night.
Yeah, it was last night. It was on.
So she submitted and she put, and I mean, I love Angelina. I've had her on. She put recurrence, yes, every full moon.
Yeah.
So I had to write her. I said, we don't have that option. So please just tell us when your next show is. Like, that is such a Angelina,
Oh, it's great. I love
obviously, it's tied into the concept of High Priestess, but I'm like, this is such an Angelina moment to, recurs on the full moon.
Oh yeah, it's great. That's a really cool. That's a cool show. That's a cool concept. Mm-hmm. I think it's really neat.
Yeah.
The show that Garrett Buss does. Oh yeah, if you haven't done Garrett Buss, he'd be really neat too.
I've done him.
See, that's why I need to look at. I need a list. I should have been
podcast players.
Well, I don't have it in front of me. That's the thing. Is I'm like, when I think about it, I'm like, well, I'll just list everybody I know because I just want to hear. I just want to consume all of their stories, except
And he was great because it was right before he was handed the keys. Or now it's Exploratorium. It's
Exploratorium is a show. It's a similar show. So yeah, that's a good show. That's there's shows that are happening outside of Austin that I'm really curious about seeing. But it's like, how do I? It's like, how do you fit? How do you fit a show in Round Rock or in Lakeway? Yeah. How do you go from the show there to downtown?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I'm stuck going, well, how can I go? I can go east and west, like a Bone Rattle and Ground Floor down over there at the Volstead and Hotel Vegas. And it's like, oh, okay, those guys are close. Yeah. I think Gutbusters is a show that it's been around for a while, and it really that show doesn't get near as much love as it should, because there's great people on that show. Yeah. There's tons of parking. There's beer. It's like it has all the ingredients, and it's like, just go see that show. Yeah. And so it's like, it's not necessarily a new show, but it's definitely a show I think that needs more people. Those are kind of my, like, hey, if you're going to go see a show, you should go see this. Yeah. Several shows seem to like have dropped, there's shows they dropped off, like Low and Inside, I think is a baseball themed show. So, well, I know it's a baseball themed show, but I think it's on this hiatus because it's like baseball's over.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh man. And so it's like, okay, well, my favorite things are like, the cool things that are happening that I guess that aren't like super out there is there's shows happening at Spider House Ballroom again.
Yes.
And so one of my favorite shows in the world is a show called Chip Show that Christina Parrish does. And it's themed around chips, like potato chips, corn chips, whatever, just crisps, anything that's a chip from all around the world. And they get passed around the audience, and you just can try them, and the comics come on stage, and there's inflatable things. Yeah. That show is amazing. You got to go check it out. The show Slap Bracelet is a show that happens at
Barrel
of Fun, which is in Mueller Development, next in the Alamo Draft House, and that show kicks butt. I like it a lot. I'm like, man, it's without the calendar. That's where the calendar comes in, because so many events, there's not like a good centralized spot. And so I've been struggling lately with finding shows that aren't, because once you get, if you're listening to this, you're probably already like a regular comedy fan most of the time. But once you get a set routine, and in Austin, it's like once you have your Monday, Tuesday, you have your Monday nights, Spider House Ballroom, go see show. And so it's, Monday, Tuesday, you either see Punch or you go see, something. You can go see Punch, you go to Cherrywood Open Mic, you can go see, Radio Coffee, you go down to Radio Coffee. There's lots of places you can go, but you have your set thing. And then Wednesday, you have your shows, and it's like, by the time you get what happens is you have this schedule, and without a calendar or some kind of feature, it's hard to say, oh, well, where else should I go? What else should I do? How do you prioritize it? But definitely think that the Slap Bracelet, I think that the Chip Show and Glow Show isn't new, but it's been moving around.
Yeah.
And that show's always super fun too. Who is it? There's a show I went to. Sorry, that's dead air. That's not even good. Let's just say that what I do, the way that I pick what I'm going to do in the morning is I have my Google Calendar send me an email at 5:00 in the morning that has all the things that are on an entry for the Comedy Wham calendar.
Wow.
And then I go through and I look at that, and then I go look up those shows and see who's on them. And then if I look at the lineup and I decide, it's like, because I'd like to see new people, but I see, okay, who have I not seen in a minute? Who have I seen?
Yeah.
Where is it? What are the specials? And just kind of like do the calculate it there. But definitely would recommend like the Chip Show and the and Slap Bracelet. Those are the newest shows that I would say are like, oh, you got to go see this. And then, Gutbusters definitely needs, I don't want to say definitely, but it's like, you could totally go see that show and then still make it in time for the Valve open mic if you wanted to.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Well,
Sorry.
I've
gone
wrap
too
up.
long.
No, it's fine. I'm going to throw your closing question at you.
Yeah.
One word to describe your future.
Oh, I think that's, I think we're going to have to go with free.
Free.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to free myself from all the different things. There's lots of different things that you kind of tie yourself to.
Yeah.
And, I've been working on freeing, free your mind and don't get stuck thinking the same way. And that's one thing.
Yeah.
But then there's also like, oh, what other things are you binding yourself to that you don't really need to, or that are just useless, and just laugh at life, you know? So yeah.
Very good.
So that would be not free time, but just free.
Yeah. I like it. Well, that is a wrap on Comedy Wham Presents Marcus Wilson. Tell us where we can find you. You've made it very easy on social media to find you. So, and you don't have to, you could, I think you've already promoted shows.
Yeah, I don't have a show. My name is, I've got an anagram for my name, and it's like, so on Twitter, Instagram, on all of the, not for, the big, bad, evil corporate enterprise, all the big corporate enterprise ones, I'm usually Cranium Slows, and then, on the free stuff, like on Mastodon and on Pixel Feed and stuff like that, I use my initials, just MNW. So,
I don't even know those sites.
Yeah, it's because I'm a nerd. So those are anyway. But if you just go to mnw.sdf.org, which is Mike Nancy Whiskey Sierra Delta Foxtrot.com, you would see that's got links to all of the different things.
Okay, very good. And if you see Marcus at a show, go say hi. He is the friendliest, kindest person. So please feel free to say hi. I'm telling you now.
Yeah, if you hear me on this or hear me on my Way Too High Lanalax episode, let me know.
Very good. We hope you've enjoyed learning about how Marcus got to be the fan genius that you heard today just as much as I have. This has been Comedy Wham Presents Marcus Wilson. I'm Valerie, and that's been funny. Thank you, Marcus.